On today's show, why are there reports about Paige Bueckers not playing for the team that has the number one overall pick in the 2025 WNBA Draft? That's a loaded question that we are going to answer today. The Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast, it starts right now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome. You are Locked On to Women's Basketball, and I'm Jackie Powell. Happy Friday. I'm one of your hosts on the program. I cover the New York Liberty here at the Next, and I've covered women's basketball and its culture nationally at many other places. Check out all of the excellent women's basketball reporting and writing we do at thenexthoops.com, and please consider subscribing to make sure that the journalists that work so hard to cover this sport are paid for their valuable work. Anyway, thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And joining me today is Kareem Copeland of the Washington Post. And Kareem, have you ever been on Locked On before? Is this your debut?
I'm pretty sure this is my debut. I mean, I've talked to all the Locked On folks before, but yeah, I think this is the first time y'all have actually got me on air, on camera, whatever the technical term is.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm sure a lot of the listeners have read Kareem's excellent work at the Washington Post covering not only the Washington Mystics, but the WNBA more broadly, women's college basketball. I mean, when you say women's basketball, Kareem has reported on it. So a big warm welcome to Kareem. So anyway.
Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, of course. Of course. It is my pleasure. So here's how this is going to go. In segment one, we're just going to give a bit of a recap as to what are these reports? What do we know about what has been reported when it comes to Paige Bueckers and her reservations regarding the Dallas Wings? Because that's a fact at this point. It's been reported. In segment two, we're going to dive into why Paige has reservations about the Dallas Wings to begin with. I think that's something that really hasn't been spoken about. There's been a lot of talk about, Paige may not want to go to Dallas, but there hasn't been a lot of talk about why. So I think it's really important to lay that out. And then in segment three, we are going to shift things to the Washington Mystics and how they have seemingly become a part of Paige Bueckers' future. And we'll get into that. So anyway, segment one, let's get going here. So Kareem, let's take our listeners through the timeline here. So the beginning was around mid-November when the draft lottery happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what was sort of the first sign that maybe this was going to be a little bit less clear than what we saw with Caitlin Clark in Indiana a year ago?
I do believe, was it Howard that had the first report that said this could possibly be a thing where it was a possibility that she might not, that she would find a way to, quote unquote, but Eli Manning is the best example, right? That of someone who's kind of worked their way into a different spot, even though they were kind of the clear-cut number one. And so I think there's been like a lot of rumors and chatter about it over, the past several months. I think that was the first one that like kind of got officially reported, I do believe. And so I think that was kind of the beginning of it. And as we're going to get into, as we go down the line, the whys, the why nots, the the hows, the whys, and the why nots of all of that kind of stuff. But I think that was the first one. I think late November, when it first kind of started popping up on people's radar. And there's been little bits and nuggets that have kind of come out ever since then.
Absolutely. That was on November 20th. I will, by the way, be linking all of these reports in the show notes so that everyone can sort of follow along and sort of see what this process has been. And then we hop over to January. So in January, for the WNBA fanatics that know, there was a huge trade between the LA Sparks and the Las Vegas Aces and the Seattle Storm that sent Kelsey Plum to LA, the number 2 overall pick to Seattle, and then Jewel Lloyd to Vegas. And so there was then more reporting sort of saying, well, okay, what does this mean when it comes to the Sparks being in the running for the Paige Bueckers sweepstakes? And, that was sort of a turning point where it was like, well, maybe LA doesn't have the assets anymore, especially since it was such a shock. Like, Kareem, do you remember the draft lottery?
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, they have been, even throughout last season, Paige was at the top of their wish list. There was no bones about it. That was what they were eyeing on, and they were the favorite to get the top pick and kind of all that. So I think it was a little bit of a shock to everybody. I don't know. I don't have super in depth understanding of how much falling to number 2 prompted those other moves, but I certainly think all of a sudden you're in the situation where you're exploring other things, because if they stay at number 1, I am pretty confident that trade does not happen. They're sitting there, they take Paige, and they start rolling with that core of Paige, Rakia Jackson, Cam Brink, and this is our young core starting to go forward.
If there was less uncertainty about who the top 2 picks were going to be, as we saw very recently, Olivia Miles decides to go back to college. The LA Sparks realized, we're being offered Kelsey Plum right now. Either Kelsey Plum right now or uncertainty. So they made that decision based on having some certainty.
Which I think is a no-brainer also.
Absolutely.
If you can get Kelsey Plum right now in her prime, and like I just mentioned, the other young pieces that they've got, you make that. If you're not getting Paige, I mean, you would take Kelsey Plum with the number 2 pick, wouldn't you? You'd probably take it, and you don't have to wait for her to develop.
And so then we march over to March, where
March to March,
and Howard came out with another report at the 9 that said that Paige Bueckers will not be focused on this decision until after UConn's season ended, and that she hadn't shared a decision with the Dallas Wings. Multiple WNBA league sources told the 9 there was no indication about where she was leaning prior to the end of Paige's season. I can report that there was an agreement that Paige's representation and the Dallas Wings came to, where Paige's representation said, we're not talking to you until after the season is over, after the tournament is over. So the fact that that was an agreement put on the table by Paige's representation, it obviously did not quell the rumors about Paige's willingness to go to Dallas. I'll put it that way.
My favorite part was she was like, didn't I already announce this? I thought everybody already knew this. When she finally made her announcement, I thought that was already out there. And and clearly all signs kind of pointed to it. So I just thought the whole kind of scenario leading up to it was pretty funny. Especially that line, oh, what? I thought I already said this before.
But then we flash forward to the beginning of April, and Kareem, you were there at the Final Four when Paige was being asked by Annie Costable of Front Office Sports now, and she asked her up front about Dallas, and Paige sort of said, I'm not worried about that at the moment. I'm worried about being here, being present. She spoke about, the draft being in God's hands. And she then Annie asked her, is there anywhere specific you would like to be? And she said, nowhere specific, wherever I end up. So you take those vague words as they are. Very non-committal. I mean, Kareem, what was your reaction to that exchange?
I wasn't shocked, and I know, sure, if she got to sit there and pick anywhere to start her career, would Dallas be the first choice? No, I don't think so. But this is the way the system is set up right now, and I never got the feeling that she was ready to take on the system and force her way out, and people were talking about her going and sitting out a whole year and playing in Europe instead, or just doing Unrivaled in Europe and waiting. None of that sounded like legitimate options to me, especially for someone who's had those injuries and had to sit out. It never made sense to me that she was going to sit out a whole season for someone who's such a basketball junkie as she is, who's been waiting her entire life to play in this league, who has lost a lot of time in these last couple years and understands that time is fleeting and anything could possibly happen.
Also, there are endorsement deals at play here. If she were to sit out, then what would happen with those endorsement deals if she wasn't playing in the WNBA? But anyway, so coming up, we are going to get into why. Why are these reports even happening? Why does Paige, as it's been reported, have some reservations about the Dallas Wings? And we're going to also explain what exactly pulling an Eli Manning is and explain why Eli Manning made the decision he made, because there are many similarities here. But first,
John Elway pulled the same thing also, right?
Yes, he did.
I was going to say, everybody always puts it on Eli, but he's not the only one.
But anyway, first, I do want to talk to you all about our friends at DoorDash. NBA fans and WNBA fans, get ready. They swoosh, you save, thanks to Dash Pass. Every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. It's simple. When a player scores 50 or more during a game, during the 2024-2025 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order, up to $10 off the next day from noon to midnight. An epic 50-point performance celebrated by ordering wings, pizza, or burgers from your favorite spot, delivered straight to your door. Or what about a quick, easy lunch the next day? With Dash Pass, you get your favorite meals with $0 delivery fees and reduced service fees. Plus, now you save even more with this exclusive NBA offer. Sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save. When any player scores 50 or more in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day, up to $10 off. Just use promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. You must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. Thank you very much, DoorDash. And I am back here with the one and only Kareem Copeland, and we are talking about this very interesting storyline about Paige Bueckers and the Dallas Wings and the reported hesitation or reservation that comes with being drafted to the organization. So, Kareem, I think where I want to start is, so this segment we're going to be talking about why she has concerns. And I think to understand why she has concerns, we have to go back and explain the Eli Manning and the, I guess, Elway situation. So, Kareem, let's do a time warp and go back to 2004. What do you remember about what was going on with Eli and why this ended up happening, where he was drafted by the San Diego Chargers and then traded to the New York Giants 40 minutes later?
Well, I mean, I think the bottom line came to it of Eli wanting to be in a more prestigious market. Um, you know, and don't get more prestigious, especially in the sports world, than New York. And so that kind of became the thing that he just didn't want to. And from my remembering off the top of my head, wanted a much bigger platform than what San Diego had to offer at the time, and through the magic of agents and behind the scenes dealings and some specific trade bait and things like that ended up making it work out. But I also think, and also the strong words of, hey, I'm not going to play here, which puts San Diego or whatever team in decision making mode. Do you call their bluff? Do you say, okay, are you willing to sit out this year? Are you willing to eat the bad press and the loss of goodwill that comes with strong arming your way out of a situation?
I actually went on YouTube last night and I looked for some reflection and reaction to this decision that was made over 20 years ago. And Eli Manning was on the Pat McAfee show, I want to say in 2023 in April. And he was asked about it by Pat McAfee. And his quote, Eli said, I was excited about going to an organization that I knew was totally committed to football and doing whatever possible to try to win some championships. So I also looked at what was going on in San Diego at the time. It was a period of a lot of instability. I mean, there was a lack of confidence in the ownership and the coaching staff and how certain star players were being treated and cared for. The San Diego Chargers went through a bunch of starting quarterbacks in maybe the span of between 2 and 4 years. There wasn't a lot of stability. And so that led to some hesitation. But I think there were some reputational issues that didn't just come out of the air. It came out of some actions. And so that gets us to this idea of why Paige has some reservations about the Dallas Wings. And, she's obviously not publicly saying it, but her representation clearly has created some boundaries because of some of those reservations. And so I think it is worth getting into why is this situation with Paige Bueckers similar to that with Eli Manning and John Elway? And so I think we have to take a look at what the Dallas Wings have been in the last few years. So Kareem, why don't we take our listeners on a journey of what the Dallas Wings have been in these past few years?
I think maybe the best way to put it is it seems like an organization that hasn't had a very clear-cut outline of how they wanted to proceed. And that's just from a roster building scenario, and that's before you start to look at things like facilities and the other outside things. I think you're going to talk about medical care here in a minute. There's all these things that kind of happen off the court also that often tend to influence these decisions. And it just hasn't been, I think, in WNBA conversations when you're looking at teams and you're seeing how different clubs run and things like that. I just don't think right now that they've had the best reputation. So kind of when you start kind of looking at all of those other things, that's why I think there might be some hesitation or people start to question why it's not the most highly ranked team when it comes to all of those other things that kind of surround what's going on in between the lines.
Absolutely. I also think you take a look at the stars that have left in the most recent years. I mean, Satu Sabali did not stick around. And her free agency happened after the Wings got the number 1 overall pick. So even with the perspective of potentially drafting Paige Bueckers, it wasn't enough to keep Satu Sabali in market.
And she was blunt about it. She was down and unrivaled and said, "I've played my last game in Dallas." And we were all like, "Whoo, all right." that was before free agency started. Like, free agency was starting like in another week or so, like that. And she said it clearly that, "Hey, I'm moving on."
Yeah, and so that really tells you something about the trajectory of the organization. And Kareem hinted at this moments ago, but when you talk about player amenities, it's not just about a practice facility and an arena. Amenities also mean having a full-time training staff and a set of team doctors that can really care for the athletes. So I did some homework and I looked up the Wings training and medical staff and looked into their backgrounds and did some reporting. And I can report that the majority of their medical and training staff are mostly seasonal contractors. And so what that means is the organization isn't putting in the financial resources or wherewithal into the professionals that need to keep the players healthy, not just during the year, but all year long. And so I can also report that, their team doctor has his own practice, but several players who needed surgeries had them done by someone else who's affiliated with a major hospital. So the reason I bring up these types of amenities is because of who Paige Bueckers is. She's a player who has been injury prone, and a player like that would want to go into a situation where they knew there was investment being made into their health and into their well-being to be able to have the most prosperous career as possible. And so, the reason things didn't go well for the Dallas Wings last year was because so many players got injured at once. It's not always bad luck and a coincidence. So I think it is just worth putting that out there, that this is another reason why there are reservations about the Dallas Wings. And that's just what the facts are when it comes to what that organization has currently been investing and spending in their players. So coming up, we're going to get into the Washington Mystics of it all. How do the Washington Mystics factor into all of this? But first, I do want to tell you all about our friends at Game Time. So, there's nothing like the energy of a live game, whether it's catching a last-minute MLB showdown or soaking in the excitement of an NBA matchup. But finding great seats at a great price, that used to be a challenge until I found Game Time. Game Time makes scoring last-minute tickets easier than ever. Prices actually drop as the event gets closer, except if you're talking about a Lady Gaga concert, but that is neither here nor there. And with their all-in pricing, you see the total cost up front, no surprises at checkout, unless if you're going to a Lady Gaga concert. Anyway, save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. You can grab last-minute seats for maybe, Smash the Musical, which I really want to see. With seat views before you buy, no surprise fees, and the lowest price guarantee, you can book with total confidence. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use Locked On NBA for $20 off your first purchase. That is code Locked On NBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. You know what? I really hope it does work for a Lady Gaga show. But anyway, thank you, Game Time. I'm here with Kareem Copeland. We're in segment 3. So the Washington Mystics are somehow a part of all of this. How exactly, Kareem? How were the Mystics involved?
Well, I mean, I think they're kind of like on the outside looking in, like most teams, to be honest. But if you're looking for if somehow Dallas is in the scenario of looking to move that pick, and you're looking around the league and say who can put together a package, a realistic package that would make Dallas listen, even though from everything I've heard they're not really listening to anybody, quite frankly, which is understandable. But Mystics wise, they're sitting there with the number 3, number 4, and number 6 picks this year. Are clearly in a position of restructuring, rebuilding, whatever the cool word to use these days, because no one likes to say rebuild anymore. But they've openly talked about, hey, we want to build this franchise up through growth and development and with youth. And I mean, you look at the moves that they've made, and it's no more Ariel Atkins, everybody that was associated with that 2019 championship team is gone now. So I think the scenario there is, hey, if you can move those 3 picks and maybe another young block like a Shakira Austin, for example, would that be enough to pry that pick away from Dallas? And the Mystics are just kind of in a weird position with a new GM, new coach. We're still trying to figure out exactly how they envision putting this team together, but they're looking for the future. It is, they're not in a win right now kind of scenario. And so, and the weird part is, but I think that the tough part about it is everybody in the leagues is about to be a free agent after next year, as the new CBA is coming. Every veteran who hasn't been on, outside of 2 or 3, just about every veteran in the league is is essentially on a 1-year deal. They've got all their deals structured. Even people who signed extensions had it ending after the 25 season, because then you'll have a new CBA. You've got a new media deal, which means salaries are going to rise. Depending on who you talk to, how much that will rise, but they're definitely going up from where they are right now. So every player smartly, and every agent knows, hey, you want to be a free agent after 2025, so now you can get a piece of this new money pile.
For sure. And I think that transitions well into why the Mystics are in a position to potentially trade for Paige Bueckers, because it would be in Dallas's interest to acquire the 3rd, 4th, and 6th pick in this draft, because that means you have 3 players that are locked in to rookie scale contracts. And as we have spoken about in this podcast, there are some reasons as to why free agents aren't flocking to Dallas. And so that would have good young talent locked in for 3, at most 4 years. And so that is all worth considering.
On the flip side, if I'm Dallas, I want the best player. We're sitting here talking about having people locked in for a while. I want the person who's the no question number 1 best talent in the draft. And if I'm Dallas, I'm not giving that up for 3, 4, 6, and a player who's going to be a free agent in a year, me personally. And I think that's probably where Dallas is thinking right now, and why they haven't been super receptive to a lot of calls. And that's why I keep saying, Mystics have the chance to put together the best offer if it comes down to that. But I still don't see Dallas moving off of that. If I'm sitting in that position, I always feel like I want to get the person in the building, and I'll work out the rest of the kinks.
Sure. They're just, and again, this all depends on what Paige decides, which If she's like, okay, yep, I'm going to go to Dallas, then none of this matters. But if she were to say, and if she were to make it very clear to her representation and to all the folks involved, if she were to, assess everything that Dallas has to offer, and she realizes, you know what, I don't know if I can do this for 4 years. We'll see what happens.
So what are her options? Outside of sitting out, which I don't think is a realistic option.
Well, I mean, what happens is the Washington Mystics come up with a deal that the Dallas Wings cannot
No, I mean
reject.
from Paige's perspective. If she's not willing to sit out a season and she doesn't want to go to Dallas, that's what I keep bringing up, and which is, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, but from her perspective, what are the power play options outside of being willing to sit out? Which, for someone, we've talked about her injury history,
Right.
Someone who's lost basketball years already, someone who has been dreaming about playing in this league since they were a kid, and here it is right in front of you. Someone who doesn't want to lose more years. You never know what's going to happen.
Right. But at the same time, you want to be able to preserve your years as a pro. And if you walk into a situation where that's very difficult because of some structural issues and endemic issues when it comes to the amenities that are available, that's something to consider as well. Well, thank you all for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen today. I want to give a huge thank you to Kareem for hopping on the show and being a very good sparring partner for this
Being a contrarian.
Oh my gosh, no, but this is very important. It's important that we tell these stories and we break it down from all of the different angles. We will see what happens. I will be back with you all on Monday night recording the live at the WNBA Draft podcast. I'm sure it's going to be a fascinating evening. Anyway, this has been Jackie Powell and
Kareem Copeland.
And we are signing off. Have a great weekend and happy Draft Eve.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.